Hello, everyone. This is Nandini Ray, your host at the Maitri podcast, Between Friends Conversations with Maitri. My production team member Shilpa Sachdev and I are very happy to have you all on this platform where we examine and analyze different aspects around gender based violence and domestic violence so that together we can raise awareness and end these crimes. In that effort, today we will be talking about forced marriage and honor crimes. Yes, these forms of violence against women still exist. And unless we do something, it will keep happening. So the first step to bring any change is to have a dialogue in raising awareness. And that is exactly what we are going to do today. We have invited Swegman and Hellitz Villegas to share their experiences and knowledge with us. It's my privilege to introduce them. Casey is a nationally recognized expert on forced marriages issue in the United States. As manager of the Forced Marriage Initiative at the Tahirih Justice Center, she engages in international outreach and training on this issue and provides technical assistance to legislatures and advocates advancing legislation to limit or end child marriage. Casey also chairs the National Forced Marriage Working Group and as a liaison to organizations across the United States, she works to strengthen communities' capacity to respond to cases of forced marriage. Hellitz is the Forced Marriage Initiative Associate at the Tahirih Justice Center. In her role, she provides direct case management, advocacy, and other support to individuals facing or fleeing forced marriage. Hellitz responds to requests for technical assistance internationally and conducts education and outreach events. She spends most of her time in safety planning with service seekers, connecting them to emergency resources, and working with other service providers to ensure the needs of survivors of forced marriage are appropriately met. Thank you so much, Casey and Harris, for coming to our show.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Let's start our discussion with some simple information, as many of our listeners may not have a clear idea of what actually is forced marriage and is it really happening in the USA? So tell us, what is forced marriage and how prevalent forced marriage is in the USA? Do you have any national statistics to back up your statement?
Thank you so much, Nandini, for the question. I think it's a perfect place to start. The definition that grounds us in the work that we do is a very widely used definition, which explains a forced marriage as where one or both people do not or cannot consent to the marriage. And this typically involves elements of fraud, elements of force, and elements of coercion. In 2011, Tahirih conducted a survey on forced marriage right here in the United States. And this survey received over 500 responses from about 47 states. The survey found as many as 3,000 known or suspected cases of forced marriage in the US. And this was just over a period of 2 years. Wow. And about 2/3 of those respondents stated to us that they felt that they knew there were hidden cases in their community that weren't coming to the attention of service providers. And this says to us that this number is really much, much larger.
Wow. And, some people in the Western part of the world may get confused and they may not recognize the difference between arranged marriage and forced marriage. But not all arranged marriages are forced marriage. So can you clarify the difference between arranged marriage and forced marriage?
Well, of course, and thank you for making that distinction. At Tahirih, we do not equate a forced marriage with an arranged marriage in every instance. We see an arranged marriage as a process in which families may take the lead, but the ultimate choice to marry still remains with the individual. And choice here is key because choice is not just about the individual they're being introduced to, but it's also about considering the timing or even the idea of getting married altogether. So it should be a yes, I want to get married. Yes, I want to get married to this person. And yes, I want to get married at this time. And we do see cases from time to time where a service seeker tells us, I did say yes. I didn't mind, the idea of an arranged marriage process, but my family told me I could wait until I was done with college and I'm still in high school. And now it's moving forward. And no matter what I say, it doesn't matter what I do, they are not stopping. So it's at that point where, consent is being dismissed that we do see things sometimes shifting.
Cassie, do you want to add anything?
No, I think Hellitz captured it brilliantly. And a lot of this conversation is really inspired by a work that was done by a survivor advocate named Vidya Sri in partnership with Durakshan Raja, who was a researcher at the Urban Institute at the time. And for folks who are really wanting to sort of interrogate and better understand this distinction and the sometimes blurry lines between arranged marriage and forced marriage, both for the person at risk themselves and the service providers who are trying to serve them and community members. The report is called Voices from the Front Line. It's available on our website, preventforcedmarriage.org, as well as elsewhere. It lives on Vidya's page when she was at Harvard as a researcher and an expert on gender-based violence. And there's a great graphic, a spectrum of sort of how people can move between consent and non-consent on all of those pieces that Hellitz talked about in terms of timing and the person and the idea of marriage at all. So if you're interested in learning more, having dialogue around that, that's a great place to start. And it's called Voices from the Front Lines.
Yeah, and there shouldn't be any ambiguity and misunderstanding between arranged marriage and forced marriage. Some people think that in Western country, I have some friends from this country. They asked me that, arranged marriage means forced marriage. I said no, arranged marriage is not all arranged marriage are forced marriage. A forced marriage should not be confused with an arranged marriage, because in my culture, in our cultures, I'm from South Asian culture and community, and arranged marriages are accepted in our culture. And in arranged marriages, both parties involved enter the marriage willingly and freely. Both parties have the final say and can decline the marriage at any point. And this is not the case with a forced marriage. And the difference between an arranged marriage and a forced marriage is actually the difference between consent and coercion that you pointed out, that consent is very important. And if we, and when we are talking about forced marriage, that we see, if we see worldwide statistics, we see that mostly women are forced to get married. But so why is that? Why is the reason behind forced marriage?
Thank you for sharing that, Nandini. It's true that forced marriage is a gendered issue. It is a type of harm that could certainly be inflicted upon anyone of any culture, of any background, of any gender. But women and girls do have, unique harms that they face, from rape and sexual assault to unwanted pregnancy. Many of the reports show the increase, poverty rates, the lack of education. And so, although everyone, can truly be a victim, depending on what is their family's motivation, it does impact women and girls in a very unique way. Casey, would you like to add more?
Yeah, and I think, whenever we're training on this topic, or I'm having conversations on this topic with folks who are kind of unfamiliar with the issue, the big question is why would anyone force someone into marriage? What could parents be thinking? Or community members be thinking, or faith leaders be thinking? And I think it's really important to ground ourselves in what Hellitz just shared, which is that this is truly happening across communities and cultures. So to help people set aside what stereotypes or assumptions they might have about who is impacted and where this is happening, because we have a homegrown problem of forced marriage in the United States. Multi-generational American families are grappling with this every day. We have the term shotgun wedding. And what is that if not a forced marriage predicated upon the idea that when there's a pregnancy, it is better for the biological parents of that child to be married. And what we know is that the assumptions about married parental households do not hold up, especially the younger the spouses might be, and that you can successfully co-parent and have a successful parenting experience without being married. And you're actually usually better off as people, as parents, and as partners, both to that child and to yourself and to each other, if you remain unmarried, at least until you're 18. And so it's important to understand that this is not an immigrant-only problem or an over-there problem. It is impacting American families multi-generationally here in the US, as well as new immigrants. And the motivations are really complex and varied. There are parents who truly believe that what they are doing is in their child's best interest. They do not intend harm. But it's when we get to a point where that person feels like they have no ability to stop a process that they're not consenting to, that we have a serious issue there with consent, as you mentioned before. We have instances where individuals might be seen as deviating from what is expected of an individual in terms of their gender role in that family or their community, or they are identifying as LGBTQIA, and forced marriage is used as an abusive tactic to correct that behavior. And or they are seen as dating before marriage, and maybe they're at risk of having sexual activity before marriage. There's a lot of motivation, again, across cultures and religious backgrounds around controlling female sexuality, preserving the reputation of the family, and beyond. You know, there can be immigration-related motivations, there can be monetary-related motivations, but those are less common than the things that I've already mentioned here. And again, all of these dynamics are present across every case we've served.
Yeah, and you were, you have rightly pointed out that it is happening. Forced marriage is happening all over the world. I mean, it's not only happening within certain communities or in some countries. It is happening everywhere. And I was reading an article that says that China's one-child policy has led to a shortage of women eligible for marriage, and men are buying brides from nearby countries such as Cambodia, Vietnam, and North Korea. And in a couple of states in India, we are seeing that male child preference also is leading to a shortage of women eligible for marriage. And then in that case, one bride is forced to get married to multiple males in the same family. And in many communities where poverty prevails, girls are seen as economic burden. And so they are forced to marry off early. And it's a vicious circle, and girls forced into early marriage are more likely to experience poverty, domestic violence, sexual abuse, and early pregnancy. And their life is basically ruined. And the next generation is also impacted heavily. And as you said, that there's so many reasons behind it. Like there could be immigration, could be correcting sexual orientation, could be just to make family reputation intact, or just to assist claims for residence and citizenship. It's a kind of it's a very complex issues, but mostly women. This is another form of violence against women. We are seeing that it's still happening, everywhere. And it's a very sad, frustrating thing. But I don't know why what to do. I mean, so why I'm just wondering that how can one identify that they may face forced marriage? If they see that is coming to them, then probably they can do something to avoid. So my question is, what are the red flags? How does one girl know that she may see forced marriage in future, and what can she do to avoid forced marriage?
Thank you so much for the question. I think it's important to share that folks know their own families best, right? We all know our own families, what's expected. We may hope for and wish that things are different for us, but it's incredibly important whenever we are working with someone, whether someone who's listening to this podcast is trying to help a friend or help a family member, that they recognize that that person knows their family best, and also that every action that is taken is truly guided by that person's wishes and their own assessment of risk and their own assessment of what is a true best option for that person at that time. I think in highlighting again that people know their own families best, I would tell that person who is thinking it, or questioning or imagining that they themselves are going to be at risk, I would ask them to truly think about how marriage has taken place in their family, or how marriage has taken place in their community in the past, and thinking of maybe their parents, their siblings, their cousins, right? And be honest with what that process was like, right? And how do they feel about that for themselves? I would also ask them to think about if they really have a choice in deciding who or when to marry. And if they don't think they have a choice, or if they want to wait until later on in life, can they really openly share that? Can they share that with those people who are involved with the marriage process? And if the answer is, no, they can't, then I would want to explore further what are the fears that they have, right? Is it a fear of something happening to them? Is it a fear of something happening to someone else they love and care about? And that, I think, is the best way of really being honest with what is likely going to happen. I think we can talk about red flags, right? And simple red flags, again, in thinking of family and thinking of the marriage process of siblings or other members of the families are really important. There are other red flags that are common, such as, maybe, there's expected travel that you're worried about, and or there's violence that happens in the home, or your family resolves issues with violence. And, as an advocate, we can, go down and mention so many other, red flags. But I think it's just really important at the simplest way is for someone to truly evaluate how the marriage process has happened in their family, right? If everyone in their family, of those who are closest to them, have been, forced to marry, what is truly the likelihood that they will be able to avoid that? And when we are honest about those processes, then we can, safety plan better and look into resources and together work on maybe what are some options to avoid that marriage moving forward.
So if they're confused and if they're scared and they want to avoid this kind of situation, what do they do? Do they call Tahirih?
Yeah, I think that asking for help, or calling for help and assistance is key, especially early on. There's a larger, chance of us being able to work together for a long time and safety plan and really think about all the options that they may have. And I'm being vague in talking about, the options and help, because for every person that looks different, right? For some people that may mean learning more about rights and options and laws. For others that may mean, getting some assistance with applying to college, or getting some assistance really safety planning around technology, or about, getting a job and bank accounts. And, for some people, it truly may be working together to relocate and go to a safe place, because they know they actually would need to stay away from their family because there is a larger, lethality assessment on their particular case. But I do think that it's incredibly helpful to be able to call or to, go on our website and write and Again, calling doesn't necessarily mean that they have to make a big decision. It doesn't mean that they have to call us already knowing what they want. It can simply be calling or writing to better discuss options. They can even remain anonymous, and together we can be a thought partner and be of support to together figure out what would be maybe a good next step. Casey, would you like to add? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, actually, to know the resources and to talk to someone to find out their options is always better. Is always better for everybody, and I believe that it is confidential. Anybody can make a call without sharing their name. So and can you please share your website and your phone number and your timing so that people know that they have a resource?
Sure. Folks can find out more about the Forced Marriage Initiative by going to our website, which is preventforcedmarriage.org. On our website, we have lots of resources for individuals at risk, but also for service providers. And we also have a Get Help tab where folks can anonymously, fill out the form, and that will go to Casey or myself. If you don't want to go through the website, which again is preventforcedmarriage.org, you can write us directly at fmi@tahirih.org. And again, that email just goes to our team. And if you prefer to call, you can certainly do so. And that would be 571-282-6187. Again, 571-282-6187. We find that folks do prefer to email, and that is a great way of reaching us, or to utilizing the Get Help portal on the website, because once you write, we can do some safety planning before calling. And a lot of the folks we work with, particularly young people, they do have some fears about their tech being monitored. And we do lots of safety planning before we make phone calls. But again, if folks want to call, that's perfectly fine, but they can find lots of information on our website. And yes, everything is confidential. Folks can remain anonymous. I know a lot of times people are scared to write or to call. We're not able to act, and we will never act without individuals' consent. But folks can certainly give us, an anonymous name, and until we build some rapport, and from there be able to discuss options. And I know that I'm being vague in mentioning what the options could be, but I think it's important that folks know that options just look different for everyone, right? For someone, it really may be, I want to talk to someone about what's going on, and I want to learn more about how they could help. Someone may call and say, I know this is going to happen next week. I need emergency help right now. And that may be, relocation or moving, and things may need to, move in a more drastic way. Sometimes folks can be calling us because they know they're going to go abroad and they're needing additional support to avoid a trip abroad, or they may be calling overseas from, parents' home country or something like that. So again, calling the earliest you can, the better, because we can certainly work together to go over options. And again, we take a survivor-centered approach, which means we do not act. We're not going to do anything without that person's consent. And even if it's just calling to talk, we're here for that support as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing all the information. And I believe if somebody is listening and if they need any help, they will contact you and they will find their options and rights so that they can have a safe and good life. It's safety planning, as you said, safety planning is really, really important. So if they call you, you can work with them how to be safe. Thank you for sharing all the information. And it's so, when we do our work, we see that sometimes family pressure can create enormous pressure on women, that they sometimes are advised to adjust with the domestic violence, what is happening, or abuse, or what is happening in their life. And sometimes they are coerced to take decision that they don't like. And if they don't, then if they don't comply, then honor crimes are happening. So, in your work, what kind of honor crimes do you see, and how can we all protect women who are facing honor crimes?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because it kind of opens the door for a lot of really important dialogue. So I think at Tahirih right now, we're taking a bit of a pause and thinking about the terms honor violence and honor killing, because I think about DV and I think about intimate partner violence, and it's always, no matter the culture or community, centered around power and control and ego and patriarchy and misogyny. Those are the threads across the board, no matter who you are, what your religious background is, where you come from. And someone's ego is hurt, the abuser is feeling they're losing power and control, and they act violently. And that's where that active violence is coming from. Maybe they felt insulted or shamed or humiliated or disrespected, or again, that feeling of power and control slipping away. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that this form of harm is present across all communities, and we call it domestic violence homicide or intimate partner homicide or domestic violence fatality, right? And those are the terms that apply across the board, because it's not just murder. We know that because the dynamics are unique and related, again, to power and control. And there is that domestic or intimate relationship. But the term honor violence and honor killings have just become so specifically targeted and applied to the Muslim community in particular and communities of color. And I feel it's truly been in an effort in many ways to portray that community as specifically more violent or more misogynistic than others. And it's in that way become a form of gendered Islamophobia, to use a term that Justice for Muslims Collective is really doing a lot of advocacy around. And it's just a term now that's become so loaded, and it invokes, I think, Islamophobia, even if we don't mean to. And so we really look to the terms like domestic violence homicide, domestic violence fatality, or intimate partner homicide to name what this truly is, without potentially bringing into the fray unintended or at times intended stereotypes about certain communities. And so I would encourage folks to look at Justice for Muslim Collective and their resources. But in terms of the more important question, really, what you asked is, how do we protect survivors from these forms of extreme violence and fatality? And I really think there's a lot that our society can do. And I think number one is recognizing the dynamics of how it's happening and where it's happening, and always asking the systems and the support of people in the survivor's life, in the life of someone who is at risk, to believe them, to believe survivors when they come forward and they say that they feel they're in danger, because the behavior on the face of it may not be perceived as particularly risky or scary to someone on the outside of that relationship. But it takes a lot for a survivor to come forward and say that they're afraid. And when they do that, they need to be believed and they need to be offered the support and services that they're looking for. And again, our role as advocates, I think in particular, as folks who specialize in this work, is that we need to be honest with survivors sometimes and help them to understand their risk. Because sometimes you're hearing somebody say something and you're looking at your risk assessment or your fatality assessment and you're seeing red flags across the board. But the person might be so used to diminishing, so used to trying to just live day to day, that they have lost the perspective that they need to know exactly what level of risk that they're at. And so we talk a lot at Tahirih about how to share that information in a way that is survivor-led and trauma-informed, but also honest. And, we say things like, based on what you've shared with me, I'm worried. I'm worried about your safety. And in my experience as an advocate, there's a lot showing up for me in your relationship dynamic that raises serious red flags. And if you've been feeling scared, if you've been feeling a heightened level of risk lately, I think that's completely rational. And I think that's a reasonable response to the circumstances you're facing. And to ground them in, as someone who has a lot of experience in this work, I'm worried about you. And then asking, what do you need to feel more safe? How can I support you to get to a place of increased safety? So putting that person in the driver's seat and connecting them to those resources that exist in the community, be they formal systems and services, shelter, law enforcement, or important leaders in that community. If they're faith leaders, if there's a woman who's, well known for her advocacy and her support of other survivors, connecting a person on their terms to the support that they need is the number one thing that we can do as service providers and advocates. And specifically as policy advocates, those of us who are in that space as well, we need to be advocating for intersectional approaches to care that will encourage more people to reach out for services, to call people into our work, and to stop otherizing these issues as much as we can sometimes. That make people afraid to step forward for help because they're afraid they'll be judged, or their families will be judged, or their communities will be judged. And so that's the other piece of what we're doing at Tahirih, is to advocate for that intersectional and anti-oppressive approach to systemic responses to these issues, so that all survivors feel that every option is available to them in a way that will really honor their courage and their own autonomy over the next steps of their life. And I know that was a really long answer, and there's only really one last thing that I would add, is that we have a very unique issue in the United States that contributes to domestic violence, homicide, and domestic violence fatality. And I would be really remiss if I didn't mention it. And that is the issue of guns. And there are lots of organizations that are doing tons of advocacy and awareness raising about this issue. It could be a podcast in and of itself. And I'm not going to do this justice, but it is really important to name, because 50% of women murdered between 2010 and 2011 in the US were killed by a current or former intimate partner. And while that figure fluctuates from year to year, it doesn't fluctuate all that wildly. And homes with guns have a threefold increased homicide risk as compared to homes without guns. And this is just one aspect of the problem of domestic homicide, of course, but there are just some known and straightforward solutions being pushed for by advocates in this space. And it's worth noting that something as simple as background check requirements can have a huge impact. In fact, women are 46% less likely to be shot to death by a former or current intimate partner in states that require background checks. And because guns play such a central role in domestic violence, homicide, and fatality in this country, it felt really important to name that. So I appreciate the space you've allowed for this answer and the complexity of all of the things we're talking about today. So I will turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And violence against women, this kind of crime is happening everywhere, in every community, in every culture, in every country. I mean, wherever you look at, I mean, you see the violence against women are happening within different forms. It is happening everywhere, and no culture, no religion support domestic violence against women. But it is happening. It's sad, it's frustrating that we are in 2021. Still, we are seeing honor crimes, domestic violence, forced marriage, and honor crimes. I don't know who coined that term in the first place. Whose honor is in any way? I mean, it's not women's honor. Whose honor? And why are we even calling it honor crime? It is simple violence against women. Those who are working every day in this field, we know how frustrating it is. But yeah. So as we are talking about our frustration, our anger, our sadness about these issues, these crimes, but at the same time, we need to be hopeful that one day community will change, we will change. Anyways, we need to do our best in raising awareness so that we can protect those vulnerable girls and who are facing this kind of oppression.
I think it's really important for folks to know that even in the worst of situations, when you have no documents, when you are maybe somewhere that it's unknown to you, at times it is possible to get support and help. And at the same time, it's also incredibly important for folks to know that help abroad can be very, very difficult. The resources are limited, and we always encourage folks, if that threat is part of their story, to try and stay in the US and to try to reach out for support as early as possible. And I'm bringing that up now, because I know that, December's coming up, and, winter break, or that break from school, is a time where we see, a lot of, young folks be taken out of the country for forced marriages, right? because they had that gap in between their studies, because there's no one at that time who's going to be looking for them. So again, if anyone is listening and thinks that this is going to happen, or parents have, randomly, discussed a trip and they just feel in their gut that something just isn't right, I would encourage them to, reach out for support now, so we can safety plan and hopefully avoid, a difficult circumstance.
Thank you, Hellitz, for sharing so many good points. But anyways, would you like to share any success story about a victim of forced marriage or honor crime that you helped?
Casey, is there a story that you would like to share, or anyone that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think there are so many good reasons to take a pause and do this. And I think you both have named one of them, which is it's really important for survivors to know, even if they're really deeply in it right now, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And who better to be a messenger of that than other survivors who have been through it and can speak from their own experience. And so I think the one thing I would point everyone to is the survivor story compilation that lives on our website, is the story of 22 survivors of child marriage in the US across all backgrounds, written by survivors themselves. And then there's a survivor stories page on preventforcedmarriage.org that has 2 forced marriage survivor stories. And I think one in particular is just, clients who come through so much and don't really know, like they trust there's a good ending at the other side, but they don't know what that looks like. And, there has been countless, it's not even just one, survivors who have turned what they would call as like their hardship into triumph and turned into advocates themselves. And so not only going to college, getting their degree, because so many survivors name education and the loss of education as one of their greatest fears, or the greatest tragedies that they experience. And so going back to school and getting those degrees, becoming successful in their careers, totally separate from gender-based violence. Some have become defense contractors, some are psychologists, but also then turning back to say, I want to use my voice to raise awareness and I want to pass legislation. And we've worked with many of those survivors in states like Texas and Georgia and Kentucky and Indiana and Virginia, and you name it. And they're standing in front of legislators telling their story and demanding change. And that, to me, I think is one of the most inspiring things, is that nobody is a monolith. You don't have to be just a survivor. You don't have to be just an advocate. You can be a million things, and they have every right to be as complex a human person as anybody else. And it's really exciting to see those kinds of folks stepping forward to share their stories.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for sharing hope with the many survivors, and thank you for sharing these empowering stories. And I believe that those who are listening our podcast today, and they are also feeling the exact the same thing that I am feeling now. And I just want to say, since we are almost the time is running out, and time is a factor. So I just want to have one question for both of you. Do you want to share any tips that, for community members, what they can do to prevent violence against women, forced marriage, etc., and any form of violence against women? And anything, do you think that I wish we had that kind of policy in place to prevent forced marriage? So if you can share any tips.
Sure. I think I'll take the first half of the question first. Community members, I think the one thing we maybe didn't touch on yet today is the role of men and boys in preventing gender-based violence. I think women and girls carry the mantle pretty much all of the time and are at the forefront of this movement, but it takes everyone, and it definitely takes men and boys. And at the community level, that looks like interrupting misogyny and patriarchy and gender-based violence harms when you see them happening, and modeling with your own behavior what it looks like to interact with women and girls on an equal footing. It comes with respect, it's understanding consent, and there are some great community-based organizations working in conversations around marriage and consent into broader conversations about healthy relationships and peaceful families. And I think that is really important, to start incorporating these conversations around marriage into the broader conversation around preventing gender-based violence, and creating and cultivating healthy families. And one of my favorite quotes from a longtime colleague and advocate of ours, Chick Dobby, when she would present, she would say, "There are many beautiful parts of my culture that I love, but forced and child marriage have absolutely reached their expiration date. And we need to all be collectively working towards eliminating them." And I thought that seemed to really ring true, especially in community conversations. It's the both and. There are many beautiful pieces, and then there are things like time is up. And so I think that piece, interrupting when you see it and calling in men and boys to this conversation, would be two really key pieces for me. And in terms of policy, there's a ton. The UK creates a really good model for us in terms of the forced marriage protection order. First and foremost, civil tools to restrain forced marriage are so necessary. And we have a 50-state regime that is kind of a hodgepodge of protection. And we really need to see protection order statutes across the board open to utilization by individuals who are at risk of forced marriage, to stop it before it happens, no matter what their age is. And there are other pieces around naming forced marriage as a form of gender-based harm in America in the Violence Against Women Act that we're working really hard for, updating our minimum age of marriage laws that would put an end to child marriage altogether, and also looking at how our immigration laws facilitate forced and child marriage, with US citizens, particularly older men, being the main perpetrators in those instances. And so there's a lot on our radar in terms of policy solutions. And again, those are all outlined on preventforcedmarriage.org. But if I had to name some top priorities, I think those would be them for my perspective. But Hellitz, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
No, I think those would be the same that come to mind, particularly the civil protections. What I'll add that I think is really powerful when working with the folks we serve is, the belief and the right that, we can love our culture, we can love where we come from, we can love our background, and rejecting something that is abusive or harmful to you, where you can think of not just, marriage is not just a paper, but think of everything that it has to do, or how it would impact your life, right? Thinking of what's expected of you, thinking of, children and potential, not being allowed to go to school or not being allowed to work, or so many things that would stem from that process. I think it's really powerful when folks share with me that, they love their culture, they love where they come from, and they also have a right to reject things that are harmful to them. And I think that is true across communities. And I think that's really powerful for folks to carry with them.
Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you so much, Casey and Hellitz, for coming to our show and sharing your experience and wealth of knowledge with us. And thank you for doing this wonderful work to support survivors and raising awareness against forced marriage.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for hosting the conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. And I just wanted to be clear that although the Forced Marriage Initiative is housed in the Virginia area, we serve survivors across the United States and of all ages, including those who are minors. So if anyone is listening and would like to get in touch, again, on the website, preventforcedmarriage.org, or by emailing fmi@tahirih.org, regardless of age, regardless of your background or whatever state you're in, we're here to provide support, whatever that looks like for you. Thank you so much, Nandini.
Thank you. Listeners, forced marriage is a grave violation of fundamental human rights and an unlawful, harmful practice. If anyone is in forced marriage situation and need confidential help, then please contact Tahirih Justice Center, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Resources are out there, so don't suffer in silence. Please contact these agencies to find out your rights and options. I'm your host, Nandini Ray, and thank you all for listening to our podcast. Please keep listening. Find all the episodes of Maitri podcast Between Friends on SoundCloud and all major podcast apps. Please like our podcast and share widely, as we need your help in gaining visibility. We need your help in engaging all community members to bring the change. Thank you. This project was made possible by funding provided by Santa Clara County Office of Gender-Based Violence Prevention.
This show is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. Views expressed by guests of the radio show are individual opinions and not endorsed by Maitri.
Maitri is a free, confidential, non-profit organization based in the San Francisco Bay Area that helps families and individuals facing domestic violence. Don't suffer in silence. Call Maitri Helpline 1-888-8-MAITRI. MAITRI. Visit our website maitri.org.